Hello everyone. So this is gonna be another LXD release review slash demo. We released LXD 4.16 last week, so it got we landed a few changes kind of last minute on Thursday, and then Thursday evening I tagged and released LXD 4.16, wrote the release announcement and those details on Friday. The LXD 4.15 release was in our candidate channel over the weekend, and since nobody reported any issue with it, we ended up rolling that out to stable users yesterday. So pretty much everyone should have received LXD 4.16 at this point if you're using the snap and you're in the stable channel. And we expect other Linux distributions will very shortly also package it on their side. Alright, let me actually show my web browser first. So that's the release announcement we put out on Friday. This is not one of the most feature-packed release that we've had. We do have quite a few features currently in development that will make it into the next couple of LXD releases, so those should be a bit more exciting than 4.16. But there's still a few good things in there, and more importantly, I guess for some folks, we fixed a lot of bugs and like performance issues in race conditions, so 4.16 should be pretty solid. The first thing we added in 4.16 is a new API within the clustering API that it lets you easily replace certificates. The main use for that is for anyone who's using production certificates from Let's Encrypt or similar platforms where the certificate expires after as short as like 3 months or so. It's a bit impractical having to manually go and update all of the servers and then restart LXD, so we've got now a built-in way of managing that. There's also support now for copying and moving storage, custom storage volumes between projects. That was supported for instances, wasn't supported for custom storage volumes, which made things a bit awkward when you wanted to move an instance that had some custom storage volumes tied to it. You just couldn't do it, or like I had to do in my own case a few times. You could do it, but you had to do some database mangling and changing stuff by hand because LXD wasn't doing it for you. That's now been fixed, and LXD 4.16 supports that. There's been a few tweaks around the lifecycle events over the past couple of releases, and also on how we can show things to be more compact when using the LXD monitor to show that information. So with LXD monitor, we added --pretty support to lifecycle events last cycle. Now we've added operation support as well, and that means you effectively can run LXD monitor --pretty and just get like one line per event regardless of the event type, and things just work now. Going back to clustering, LXD 4.14 I believe it was, LXD 4.14 introduced support for using tokens to join new cluster members without having to use the trust password. That works great, but the CLI did not give you a way to easily revoke one of those tokens. You could go and do it by canceling the matching operation, but it was a bit weird and needed to kind of look around to find out. So now there's a proper command to do it. There's also support now for IP filtering on unmanaged bridges. So we had that for managed bridges for a little while. Effectively, LXD puts in place a number of EB tables, X tables, or NFT rules to filter traffic coming from the specific instance, so that it cannot be spoofing an IPv4, IPv6 address using some other instance's address. That's been pretty solid, but it requires LXD knowing what the expected address is, and we effectively only have that knowledge when it's on a bridge that we manage ourselves. That was a bit too limiting for some folks, so we've now added support for still using that feature on unmanaged bridges, where the user then needs to provide LXD with what the expected address is for that given instance. Then on the warning side of things, so again, that's a feature I think we added in 4.14, and we've added a bunch more warnings in 4.15 and 9 in 4.16. I think we're getting pretty close to covering all the things we want at this point. So this release adds warnings for things like mass connection failures, network startup failures, offline cluster members, instance auto start failures, AppHammer being disabled on some specific network due to the user making use of raw DNS mask and passing custom config. Misconfigured IPv6, so effectively using sub IPv6 prefixes that are oversized, which is not supported by DNS mask. And some issues again with hairpin NAT when BRNet filter is not enabled properly and you're using proxy devices in NAT mode. So all of those will now issue proper LXD warnings that can be listed and resolved across the entire cluster. And lastly, as far as other things, we added a bunch of lifecycle events. It used to be somewhat restricted to instances, instance snapshots, backups, and networks. This has been expanded to effectively cover actions against every single LXD object now. And that means that we think the lifecycle events can now be used as a proper audit trail for what's going on a LXD server without needing to actually record like a full log of what's going on the server. Those are far easier to understand and read. They can have just as much like anything that's particularly useful to know, like if you're executing a command, that command is recorded as part of metadata of that lifecycle event, so you know what's going on. But it doesn't include too much. Like if there's an update, it's not gonna give you everything, that the entire config of that particular instance. Instead, you get the URL and you can go and fetch the object if you care about knowing exactly what happened. So there's actually a link there to our documentation for the full list of events we have now, and it's reasonably long. So that covers everything. All of the instance support got increased a bit, so we've got even file transfers and metadata update and all that kind of stuff. But we also added support for network ACLs, added support for profiles, operations, projects, storage, cluster, a few more network things, warnings, images. Like we actually went through the entire API and everything is covered now. Alrighty, so that was for the announcement itself. And now I'm gonna go and actually try to demo some of those. So let me switch over to a terminal. There we go. For this week's demo, I'm actually running 3 virtual machines because a few of the features are using clustering. So I figured I'd just assemble a quick LXD cluster and show things from there. So let's start with the first one. So I'm gonna do a cluster. Not joining an existing one, name is fine. We changed that behavior, I think it was last release, where we don't set up a password by default now on clusters because that's not needed with the token-based join. Let's still create normal storage pool. I'm just gonna be using loopback, it's fine. No remote storage, no connection to MAS. We can use the fan bridge, that's fine. Detect everything, done. Okay. So that's the first one done. Its IP address was up here, so I'm just gonna copy that and go and join the second one. Oh, actually, let me create the token. So LXC cluster add, the VM is gonna call VMO2. So that's the token. Let's copy that. Go to the second one, clustering, yes. IP address is okay. Joining existing token, existing cluster, yep. And we actually changed a few things there as well. So we don't ask the name of the joining machine now until after the user declined to provide the token, because the token itself includes the name. So it was kind of redundant. The other thing is a few of the questions now allow this syntax where we can say, do you have a join token? Yes, no, or you can actually provide the token immediately, which then saves you one question. The same is true for the fingerprint checks, where instead of saying yes, no, the fingerprint match, you can actually paste the expected fingerprint and then the LXDNet will do the comparison itself. So in this case, I'm just gonna dump the token directly here as the answer. And we see it's just moving forward with joining the cluster. Just leaving those empty. And joined. All right. So now I've got a simple 2 nodes cluster. What I'll do next is actually show what happens with the that new feature where we can revoke a cluster join token. So if I do VMO3, it generates the token. If I do list tokens, we can see it here. Font size makes it a bit wonky, but we could change the zoom a bit. Anyway, so it does show the token is there, and now we can do revoke token and paste the token. No cluster change. Oh, whoops. This is actually one that I. Yeah, so we can just do revoke the token for VMO3, and it's gone. Anyway, I actually did need to join VMO3, so let's generate a token again. You notice that the token is actually the exact same string. That's on purpose. Like, it was revoked, it was not valid anymore. If we generate it again, we do end up with the exact same string because the token is like, if I install JQ, I can show you actually. Token is not particularly magic. All it includes really is join information and a temporary secret. So if we do token and we decode it and then we unJSON it, there we go. So it does give us a random secret, which would be somewhere in there, but the rest of the pattern is the same because the server name didn't change, the fingerprint of the cluster didn't change, and the 2 addresses of the existing cluster members did not change. Only the secret changed, so only the latter part of the token would have changed. Alrighty, let's copy that again, and let's join. Oops. Let's join the third one. So clustering, yes. Joining token, yes. That's the pre-seed that's generated, and we're done. So we should have a 3 nodes cluster now. Oh, good. Let's look at our warnings. All right. So there are 2 warnings on the first node. We can acknowledge those 2. It's the usual reporting because of the block IO wait group is usually disabled on most Linux distros, and memory swap accounting, at least on Ubuntu, requires you to boot the system with swap accounts equals 1, which is not the default, so that's normal. So acknowledge those 2, we're good. One warning we should be able to show easily enough is the one for a cluster member being down. So in this case, I'm just gonna be shutting down LXD on VMO2. After a little while, it should show up as being offline on this one. LXD sends heartbeats every 10 seconds effectively, and after a cluster member has missed a couple of those, then we consider it to be offline. So it's gonna take a tiny while for it to happen, but eventually we'll see VMO2 going offline there, and that should also issue a matching warning. Okay, it's gone. No sign of a warning yet, huh? I wonder what the threshold is for the warning to be emitted. It's supposed to be emitted by the leader at the time this happens. There we go. Offline cluster member. So this is getting actually. Oh, and we see it got reported a few times, and the count will keep increasing every time we try to reach out to it. Anyway, let's start it back up, which should then clear that particular warning. Just give it a few seconds. Okay, so if I go back here, Yeah, it's gone and then was replaced by cgroup warnings for that system. Which we didn't acknowledge yet. When we acknowledged the ones for VMO1, it was VMO2 this time. So there we go. That's the new warnings. And there are a few more, but obviously they're not always super easy to trigger because you need to actually simulate something going quite wrong. The other thing we can quickly see here is the cluster certificate situation. So right now, let's look for the fingerprint there. So that's the cluster fingerprint. This on the file system, if you look, there's effectively LXD cluster CRT. So there are two CRT files these days. One for the machine itself and one for the cluster. So in this case, we can see the cluster has a hash that starts with ABD, and the local server has a hash that starts with 8EEE. If we do the same thing on the others, we should see, there we go. So ABD, that's the same for the cluster, but the server one differs. That's normal. And there again. Now, I've got a new cluster certificate here. New certificate I generated earlier. So demo.crt. Which is going to be different, as we can see, 501. And I would like that rolled out on the cluster. So in the past, what you would do is actually SCP or use similar tools to go and replace cluster.crt and cluster.key on every single system and then reload LXD. That was always a bit annoying, also because that comes with an API downtime, whereas this doesn't. So there's a new command here called update certificate, which then takes the CRT and the key as arguments. So just do demo CRT, demo key, and that should be done. So if we do this and we compare with that, we can see that 501 is now the one that's live on this system, on that system, and on that system. And we should be able to even check that. Trying to remember what IP address it's binding. It's probably binding, that's 172 something. Yeah. Okay, so we can use OpenSSL with sclient host 172.17.1680, port 8403. And that should show, break that into less, I guess. Okay, so we can see the certificate, and we see that that particular certificate I created manually with OpenSSL. So I got to set some of the metadata, and in this case I set the location as being in Montreal, Quebec, and it as being demo. So that confirms that LXD didn't actually need to restart or anything, but did replace the certificate and it's live on its API endpoints. So that's the new cluster certificate update feature. The other feature we've added is that cross-project custom storage volume copy and move. So obviously here it's a new system, so it doesn't really have any projects. We can create a new one called foo. Okay, now let's switch over to foo and create volume create in the default storage pool. Let's call it vol1. Yeah, just go, oops, storage. Oh, it's a cluster, it's gonna be called local instead of default, that's fine. Alrighty, so now storage volume list local. We see it on this one. If we go check in the default project, it's not gonna be there. And should be able to, let's do a copy first. I'm gonna be doing volume copy. Storage pool is local, volume is called vol1. I think the syntax is this. So we're copying it with the same name across, and target project is default. So now if I list my local project, it's still there, and if I list default, it's there too. Now let's go and delete it from the default project, so there's no name conflict. Vol1. Okay, it's gone. And instead of doing a copy, now I should be able to just do a move, which will drop it from my current project. And if I go look at the default project, it's going to be there. So that kind of works as anyone would expect. It can easily move and copy storage volumes across projects now. And that matches the exact same workflow we've got with LXD copy or LXD move, where the exact same target project is used. Now onto the monitor. So, as I said in the past, you could use the --pretty option, but only if it was combined with something like here in this example, where you use type logging. Then we added type lifecycle, and now we've got type operation, which covers all 3 types, and that means you can just do this now. In this case, so that log entry here is just a so at debug level, so those are all log entries that we're seeing on the cluster. Now, if I was to actually create something, it's actually interesting. It's got something that's a bit confused by the certificate change, I think. Let's see if the cluster members are all online. No, okay. Something got slightly annoyed. Might have broken my cluster, maybe. I don't know. Hopefully not enough to break the demo. I think the issue is that the certificate I fed to the cluster doesn't include any SANs, so that's the whether it's IP or DNS records, and Go doesn't like that anymore. So SSL does that by default, so it doesn't add the DNS records, whereas Go TLS expects it unless you set an environment variable. So I might actually have replaced my cluster certificate with a slightly less than ideal other cluster certificate. Anyway, just hoping that things work well enough that I can keep on the demo. There's something to keep in mind. When you generate a certificate, make sure you generate it with like all the right fields and everything in it. If you, like, Let's Encrypt would not generate you a certificate that's as broken as what I just used. So that wouldn't be an issue, but something to keep in mind. Alrighty, so we get the monitor running on this one. Let's see if I can actually create an instance. I'm just gonna use Alpine because it's faster to download. What's it complete? Oh, wrong project. That project doesn't have anything configured yet, so I'll just switch back to default and launch again. Here we go. So now we've got a bunch of stuff in there because it's mixing log entries and operations. So those things here would be, I think those are operations. Let me just check. Yeah, the format, that's definitely operations. Then you've got things like that, which are lifecycle events. And those are logging. So that shows all 3 types being mixed in. Now, we can definitely do type lifecycle to restrict to just that. And if I do restart A1, okay. Now we get instance restarted, action, and the source. Just to compare, the difference with that pretty is that it's gonna be a bit, it's gonna expand the entire YAML structure. So that gets you a bit more details, but that's also obviously taking a lot more space. Let's do an Ubuntu container. That should show us a few more of the lifecycle stuff. Yeah, there we go. So now we're getting image created. That's one of the new lifecycle events. And an instance created. And an instance started. The same, as I said, is true if you create like a new profile. So if I create a new profile called foo, we're getting profile created foo. Same is true for projects. I can create blah. And project created. That works for cluster things too. So if you do cluster add foo, generating a token, I was also generated a cluster token created event. So the lifecycle output is really, really useful now because it covers just about everything. All right. Then I think the only thing left to try and show is the filtering on unmanaged bridges. This might be a slightly funny one to set up, so let's see if I can get it working. Because I can't just go and use LXD network create, that would be a managed bridge. I need a unmanaged bridge on purpose. So let's just create one. Let's call it demo BR0, and it's a bridge. Okay. Then bring up that bridge. So I'm just gonna add an address onto it. Let's just do that. IPv4 address and dev. Okay. All right. So we've got a basic bridge that's got an IP address, and obviously no DHCP, no nothing on it, but that should be okay. Then let's reconfigure that U1 container to use it. So I'm just gonna be shadowing its ETH0 device with a new one. So NIC type is gonna be bridged. Parent is demo BR0. The name inside will be ETH0. Do I need to do anything else? I think that's probably it for now. So just make sure it starts. So first let's try something that I wouldn't want to allow. So I'm going to be adding onto ETH0 inside there. I'm going to be adding 192.168.0. Let's do 0.10. And use that to ping the gateway. So that worked fine. But say I only wanted U1 to be allowed to use the 192.168.0.2 address, I guess. Let's see if we can force that. So the way we do it is LXD config device set U1 ETH0 security IPv4 filtering true, and I need to provide the address that I'm expecting to use 192.168.0.2. Okay. So now starting that again, everything worked so far. So let's say if I put 10 in place again and I ping, that does not go through. That's good. And now if I add the expected address, so 02, and I ping, it does go through. So yeah, that's security filter IPv4, and I could do the same thing with IPv6, filtering on unmanaged bridges. You do need to provide configuration to LXD to tell it what to filter, but it is now possible to do that just fine. And that takes us to the end of what's new in this LXD release. So as I mentioned, it's already being rolled out to our users. It started yesterday, so pretty much everyone should have gotten it by now. And yeah, so far everything is pretty solid. Quite happy with this release. I'm expecting LXD 4.17 will have some larger features we've been working on. I think the two main ones I can think of right now are the new LXD recover command to do disaster data recovery and like re-import instances, storage volumes, or similar deleted or lost data back into LXD, as well as the new LXD cluster, well, LXD cluster evacuation feature, which makes it possible to evacuate a cluster member by moving all of its instances to other cluster members temporarily. So that's super useful for maintenance. And yeah, you'll be able to do that without having to do things manually or use external tooling to do this. We're also working on specifications for a few new major features to come over the next few releases. The one I just finished writing yesterday as far as specification is for built-in Bgp support in LXD. That will make it possible when we use the LXD cluster with either oven or with different bridges and external addresses being passed through. Those will make it possible to announce those to an upstream Bgp router to set up the routes needed for the traffic to go towards LXD without needing the system administrator or network administrator to go and manually do that on the upstream routers. The other feature I think we're going to start writing a specification for very soon is a Prometheus endpoint directly inside LXD, which will give some metrics around LXD itself, so like number of go routines and a bunch of internal things, but more importantly, metrics around the instances running on that machine. So amount of memory, amount of CPU, disk, network I/O, that kind of stuff will be exposed in a way that can easily be aggregated by Prometheus and then graphed with something like Grafana. If you want to keep an eye on what's going on, we have obviously our weekly news on the forum, so you can see those here. Weekly news 206 was the one we published yesterday. That's always a good thing to keep an eye on, but we also have now a new category on the forum called specifications, which has those more formal specifications we're writing for new features. So I mentioned the disaster recovery tool. We do have a specification there for that, which kind of goes over what it is, what's the state of things, what we're trying to make better. It covers more low-level things like the REST API we'll be implementing for it, what the CLI workflow is that we expect for this, and any other like upgrade handling or any other thing we need to fix. And yeah, great community feedback as we write those, so that's always very welcome. The other feature I mentioned was the cluster evacuation. So it's pretty similar. We've got what the CLI is expected to be, changes to the API for it. And that one, I think we were actually kind of bike shedding the exact naming back and forth quite a bit. So there are a few comments, and we eventually, I think we even ended up having a poll for it. Yeah, we did. So we weren't really sure what made the most sense to users as far as the naming for the comments. So we ended up just running a quick vote over like 2 or 3 days, I think, and then went with that. And the other one I mentioned is that BGP work for that I wrote a spec for yesterday, and that I'll start working on probably pretty soon once I get the chance to have it reviewed by a couple of folks. And yeah, that's it for 4.16. I'm always hoping I get to do another interesting live stream about something other than just release announcements between now and the next release, but it's quite a busy time for us. A bunch of folks have been taking time off this summer. There's some planning and company roadmap preview stuff coming up next week, and yeah, just in general, pretty busy time for us. So I'm not sure that's gonna happen, but yeah, fingers crossed. We get to use this channel for more than just the release announcements. In any case, thanks for everyone watching this, and yeah, see you in another stream at some later time. Bye.